committed to raising up visionary Jewish women entrepreneurs and leaders. And we do this by identifying leaders who use their Jewish values and a gender lens in their work, and whose voices need to be heard on an international stage, by granting financial resources to support their work and their personal professional development, by providing them with a curriculum designed to address their specific issues and needs, and by supporting them with the one thing we hear they need time and again, a cohort of other leaders to both stave off the loneliness of running an organization and to benefit from the shared wisdom of each other. Last fall, hundreds of women and men gathered at our online convening to learn about emergent issues in the Jewish community and beyond that affect traditionally marginalized individuals and groups, and to meet the extraordinary leaders we support. Over the course of 2 mornings, we had 26 speakers, some on panels, some individuals. And while that gave us a breadth of information, we realized that for a few topics, we could only skim the surface. Thus, the Convening Revisited was devised, a 3-session series focused on 3 of the most emergent topics discussed: movement building, intersectionality, and philanthropy. Today is the inaugural session on women and philanthropy, and we're grateful that our original guests returned for a deeper dive: Paula Pretlow, Sally Gottesman, and Alisa Doctoroff. A link to their bios is in the chat. After we discuss a few follow-up topics together, we'll move to your questions. So please post them in the chat. You're all muted to reduce noise, so that is the best way to get our attention. So welcome to Welcome Paula, Sally, and Alisa. And it's great to see you all again. Shall we just jump right in? All right. One of the topics that received a great number of queries was why there are not more women leading the change that feminist philanthropy can engender. We know that the wealth of women has steadily increased over the past 2 decades, and we know that women are giving to secular education, health, and movement building at an increasing rate. We can count those who have been steadfast in supporting the field of Jewish women leadership on one hand. So my questions today are, why do you think the field has not grown as quickly as we would expect based on the factors in the secular community? Who will speak to the moral imperative of gender equity if it's not women? And is there a place in philanthropy for that conversation or for funders to rise to the occasion? And basically, why are there just not more women leading the charge for feminist philanthropy? That's the question. 8 million questions in one. I recognize that. Who would like to get us started? Paula.
Well, thank you, Jamie. I am not going to try to answer all at once. However, why don't we start, or why don't I start with your question about why aren't there more women rising to the top to take on the challenge of philanthropy and feminist philanthropy. Traditional philanthropy is hard to break, and traditional philanthropy has the power structure based in who has had the money. Mm-hmm. Men have controlled the money, and women have been in supportive roles in that regard. I think we are more and more coming into our own. We are realizing, understanding our power. And I mean, look at the 4 of us on the screen right now and everybody in the audience. We're here because we realize we also have control. How will we step into that power? How will we feel comfortable with it? And how will we move the field forward? I think it is in supporting one another as we are on this call, understanding that we do have power. How do we use it? And how do we deploy it? How do we bring others in? And I think that's what we're going to explore a bit today. And I couldn't be more excited. We have power. We need to learn how to use it.
Absolutely. Great.
I'd love to add to that.
Yes, please.
So I think that there is also a growing recognition in the Jewish community. I mean, it is growing but it has been there for a while, but a sense that we really need to support women. And that it's not just women who need to support women, but it's men who need to support women, because if we just put all the onus on the group that's here, it's not going to work. So there has been the development of a variety of organizations to help support professionals, I would say largely. But I think that that can move into the philanthropic world too. The safety, respect, and equity, the development of that organization, which had a series of funders come together to support it and to work on the issue in the Jewish community specifically. And it developed right around the same time as at Me Too. And which I think has made some progress. The other organization that I'd cite is Leading Edge, which is an organization that was founded to look at talent in the Jewish community. And they've to date primarily looked at professional talent, not the lay talent, although they're moving into that arena. And they did a study on women, gender equity in professional Jewish life, and I think are in the process of developing some programmatic or policy recommendations around that. So, and that came out of philanthropy. Those things would not have happened if not for philanthropic interest in talent, and then in the issue of gender in the talent pool, and the issues of equity in the talent pool and at large in the Jewish community. And some of the like if you look at the Schusterman Foundation, which is run by women, there are some male professionals, but there are some women professionals as well. And certainly the driving force in that foundation has been Lynn and now Stacy. And, I'd also cite the Jim Joseph Foundation, which the CEO, I'm the chair of the board, but the CEO is a man, and he was instrumental in founding the Safety, Respect, and Equity organization. And that's sort of my point, in that we need men to be articulating these important values as well as women.
Absolutely. Sally, did you want to say anything?
The only thing I agree with Alisa that, it's funny, when Moving Traditions founded, we actually from the start wanted to deal with men and women, so our boys and girls, so that not half the population was changing. And we've been able to do that. But I was thinking that to the people who are donors on this call, or those people that really, I think that giving money to organizations run by women is really important, right? That in a field, there's usually, you have a choice whether there's a CEO as a man or CEO as a woman, and organizations are doing similar types of work. And I think that women supporting other women through like saying, I'm going to give to this organization part because there's a woman CEO. And I think that also helping, Paul is right that it's money. And then I think it's also talent and who knows who. And I was thinking about, when I was thinking about today, I thought about shidduchim, right? Like, when have I actually helped find board members for organizations, and how important it is to help find women to be board members of organizations, because that's where part of the power is. And then I think people are somewhat lazy about that, or don't feel good about that. I mean, I've yet to introduce anybody to be married, but I was thinking about 2 board matches that I've made, and it brings a great amount of pleasure. And I think we have to be thinking of women to put onto boards, quite frankly, so that there's more women sitting around the table.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Paula.
I think you're absolutely right about that. And we have to be very intentional, and it has to be in our thought process all the time. Even when there's not an active search for a board member, we should be thinking ahead as women, who might be the next generation, who might be the younger woman who is just on the cusp of assuming responsibility. How might we help her get there? But I think it is vitally important that we think about who are other women to serve on these boards of philanthropy and nonprofit.
Right. And I think women have to ask, right? Like I remember being a young professional in my 20s and somebody said that he would join the New Israel Fund board and if he could be chair. I remember being so surprised, but now I actually understand why that could be. And I think women need to learn that it's okay to ask. This interests me. I'm going to ask for it. I think that many men don't hesitate to ask in that same way.
Yeah. Alisa, you brought up Jim Joseph Foundation, and I was there when, in JWFNY, representing JWFNY, when the Safe to Respect Equity Now Network began. And I remember saying to Barry, who is the CEO of the Jim Joseph Foundation, Barry Feinstone, that the issue wasn't a women's issue. It was our issue. And we weren't looking for allies because we didn't need allies. We needed partners. Like it wasn't like if my daughter is a lesbian and then I'm not, or I'm straight, and so then I support her, I'm an ally to the LGBTQ community. But in this instance, right, in the Safe to Respect Equity world, there are no allies. We are all in it together, because if we're not making it better together, then it's never going to be together. So it's not like a woman's problem that men are helping to fix. And I really value people like Barry, who is a feminist. And what he talks about is embedding into an organizational culture. And I say as an individual culture also, like what you're talking about, Sally, embed in our minds that when we meet people, we introduce them to other organizations. We say, oh, this is what you're interested in. I happen to know the whole field, so I'm going to send you over there. And there are a lot of women who know the field of Jewish philanthropy. And I think that that's where we can be beneficial. And I just want to also say, I want to speak to the age issue. Because what I see a lot of in the Jewish community are programs that are focused on 25 to 35-year-olds, if they can even be 35. I know some go up to 40. And I assert that many women are just hitting their stride when they hit 40, and they're completely eliminated from a lot of these leadership programs because of their age, because they're not, the young, shiny new toy. They're the young, seasoned woman who has a lot to offer and a lot to bring to the table. And we don't need, if we're listening to what 25-year-olds want, we should be listening to what 35-year-olds want, and what 45-year-olds want, and what 55-year-olds want, and 65, 75. Okay, right? At JWFNY, we have, our founder is turning 90 this summer, and she is as alive and energetic and present as any of our younger board members. And I'd like to talk about that too, like how we're how the Jewish community just loves the youngsters. And someone told me yesterday, and that youngster keeps getting younger and younger and younger. So now it's, it wasn't enough that we were raising up 20-year-olds. Now we're raising up teens. And then we're going to get down to, like the preschool. And of course, we've always supported across the generations. But I'd like to hear what you have to think, what you're thinking about in terms of, I'm not going to call it ageism, because I really don't think it's that. I really think people are coming from a good place and thinking longevity, right? I'm going to invest in you for a long time. So Paula, what are you thinking?
Thank you for that. And I want to go back and say, it's so nice to be reunited with this group of women in this panel. We had such a wonderful time in October. It's just a joy to be back with the three of you on this panel. I think it is our responsibilities. Well, let me speak personally. I think it's my responsibility to be the best board member. I'm a member of the Weinberg Foundation Board of Trustees, by the way. I serve on other philanthropy boards as well as corporate boards. I feel it's my responsibility and my duty to always be on the lookout of who might serve and how might she best serve.
Mhm.
I think it is absolutely wrong to look at narrowly defining who are the up and comers, although I think that is absolutely important. But I think this gets to the point of diversity. Diversity comes in all kinds of ways, including age. And we will produce the best outcomes if we have a variety of age groups, in this case, sitting at the table. I don't know what all 25-year-olds are thinking, but I want to be at the table with them to find out. I also think it is important, and I am blessed to have mentors who are in their 90s and still serving. I want to know what they're thinking and bringing to the table too. I'm somewhere in between, and I think our voices, my voice, is powerful and needed as well. I think we are not doing the best for our community if we are not having a variety of voices at the table. So that's what I would add at this point, and I'm so interested to hear what my colleagues think.
I totally agree with the concept of having a diverse group of people around the table, and that diversity comes in all types. You know, it's not just age, it's background, it's religious orientation, it's sexual orientation, it's race, it's everything that makes up our community. But, I'd say in regard to age, I think one of the reasons that there has been that focus has been because boards have looked around at themselves and seen that they are largely, this is not everywhere, but many of the legacy Jewish organizations have seen that the population in the boardroom is old. And so when you say that the age, the young goes up to 35, no, the young actually goes up to 60, so, I think that it's an overcorrection perhaps, but there's been a desire to make sure that the population around the table actually is diverse. And what that means is bringing in some younger people. And the question is sort of, how do you engage the younger set in participation in these organizations? You do have to give them a role.
And a real role.
And a real role. But
Yeah.
I think that's true for everybody. Actually, it's only interesting to be on a board if you have a role, if there is something for you to do. I've also said, I was just thinking about age, and age also from the standpoint of someone being involved. I think about the age of the organization too. It's been interesting. I was on the board of Moving Traditions. Sally did exactly what she said, which was look for people for boards. And she found me and put me on the Moving Traditions board. But Moving Traditions was a young, developing organization. And I found it incredibly interesting, in my involvement, to be involved with an organization that was young and had younger people around the table, as well as being involved in a legacy organization where, the challenges were dramatically different, and the people who were around the table were also different. I'm not saying that they should be bifurcated, but there is, from the standpoint of involvement, there's something interesting about the two different types.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's funny because actually I was thinking that I mean, I'm not that involved with legacy organizations, so I don't see that problem, but I am involved with some younger organizations, and I see a different problem that I think that women could actually help to be part of this problem with solve, is that many women, I would say in their 50s probably, say, I don't want to serve on boards anymore, right? It's like exactly at the time where they actually have more time, they have experience. Now I get it, right? Like they feel like they've been to a lot of meetings, but there are numerous people in their, 50s, 60s, 70s, women that I've spoken to who say like, I don't want to do boards anymore. And it's everybody's right not to do boards anymore. Yet on the other hand, it is a problem. It's exactly the point where they actually have what to offer, and especially offer young, the newer organizations, let's say, if they don't want to be in legacy organizations anymore. And it's sort of they're taking away part of their own power, because actually organizations would be interested in them. That's what I've run up against, that with lots of people who say, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm tired of boards. And,
yeah, I also see women saying, I don't think I could afford to do that. Like I've heard that also. I can't afford to be on a board. I have a family, my kids are young, I'm paying for school. And so in addition to age, I'm interested in all kinds of lived experiences on boards. And I noticed that Alana raised in the chat about people of color. We're looking, at JWFNY, we have a few, sadly few, but I love them all, board members who are Jewish women of color, who bring different lived experiences, who are younger than others and on other boards. And what we try to do is both raise up those voices and ensure that they're part of the whole. So not like that 32-year-old is representative of all 32-year-olds, but more like this woman brings all of herself to the board, and she brings all of her lived experiences, so that we start to, I want to say normalize, right? We start to normalize that lots of different kinds of people are sitting on all of these boards. And of course, we come up against often, how do we find people to be on the boards? And some of that has to be this kind of relational, I know this person and I'm going to introduce them, because there's no pipeline. There are programs now like Boardified that is, specifically for people who are either on or interested in sitting on not-for-profit boards, but it's a high cost to participate. And it's a great program. I took something from there, loved it. And not everyone can do that. And so in order for us to have all these lived experiences, we need to open up more. We need to have people on our boards who maybe can't afford the give or get that everybody is, signs up for. And we need to have that kind of flexibility that at the same time, I hear my, board chair in my head, at the same time, we need to pay our bills, right? So there's it's the balance of, thank you, Roberta, for saying that Boardified gives generous scholarships. I did not know that, and I'm glad to hear that. But I think that's what we have to think about. And when I think about women joining boards, like I started with, there's a lot of wealth in the community of women, and that could be put toward the Jewish community, and not just the Jewish community of women, because this is what I think, is that the Jewish community as a whole will benefit when more of us are on boards. Not just women, not just children, not just people in their 20s and 30s, but everybody. And that's the equity and the equality piece that goes hand in hand in terms of making sure that we have more voices, not fewer voices. Does anybody want to speak on that? You want me to go to the next question? How are you feeling? Okay, I'll go to the next question. So these questions come from our not having them answered the last time we were together. So some of them will feel very familiar. So the last time we talked about some of the power dynamics between grantors and grantees, and one issue raised was the tendency to overthink donors for their gifts. So I know for me, it always feels really odd to gush with gratitude over a gift as if someone just gave it for me, like I'm going to go shopping or something. I know that it isn't for me, it's for the work. And yet it still feels like it's my responsibility to make sure that the donor feels good about their gift. I find this to be somewhat problematic in my giving also. Like, I don't want people gushing over me if I've given a gift, like a simple thanks is fine. But we're working really hard to level the playing field between grantors and grantees and to treat them as the experts. But there's still this reticence on the part of some grantees to be transparent. It's as if they've had decades of PTSD from this power skewed relationship. So I'm wondering how you've experienced this power dynamic from both sides and how you think we can overcome it. And what role, if any, could excellence in grant making play in that dynamic? Like, what have you seen in the field?
You know, I'm thinking about what Paula said about the, you know, the dynamics in the field of, you know, women in philanthropy and age, you know, and so much of it is like what has been, and it's hard to change. The change is hard. So there's been this dynamic, and I think it is hard to change. And there probably is PTSD. You know, people have been treated badly, and, you know, I guess not all donors are the same either, right? So that's difficult. Like, you know, you're saying you're uncomfortable with people gushing over your gifts. I am too. I really, you know, what I want to know is, what is the organization doing? That's sort of the payback. You know, the payback is, I help to support, you know, I'm helping in my way, whatever that is, to support this organization. What have you done? You know, it's like, how are you measuring yourself? How are you advancing? How are you putting not just my money, but the money of all the donors to work to achieve the goal that is what I bought into, really? So I think the more we focus, hopefully, you know, the more we can focus on what is the goal of the of my giving to you, and develop the relationship on that basis. You know, it's like talking about the work, talking about the achievements, talking about and also, frankly, what didn't work. And I think that's where, you know, people get nervous. But I think you know, there's got to be some sense of openness, and I guess it has to come from the philanthropy side. You know, there has to be some way to build trust, so that, you know, I articulate, you know, look, I'm as interested in the failures and in what didn't work. And you have to say that directly as what did work and what, you know, more you're doing. But I think, you know, I think having conversations with the grantees and articulating that I'm interested in what didn't work and what you learned from it. And, you know, not penalizing them for what didn't work, but saying, actually, that's a good thing. You tried something and it didn't work and you're learning from it.
And I'm going to apologize for my tech issues that seem to be coming and going. So I missed part of what you said, and I apologize for that. What I did hear was about learning and the reluctance at times for the grantee to be forthcoming in what's really happening. I think it's our responsibility to encourage the role of philanthropy. These are the dollars that are meant to, in my opinion, exploratory in some regard. There are the traditional programs that we know work, but there are also the opportunities to kind of take additional risk. If philanthropy isn't going to take that risk, am I frozen?
No, you're
Not
good.
anymore.
We can hear you.
I'm sorry.
It's perfect. Go ahead, Paula. We were with you.
Okay. If philanthropy isn't going to take the extra additional risk to fund a program to see what might work, who's going to do it? I think part of our role in philanthropy for those exploratory dollars, we all benefit, and we shouldn't be afraid to have those conversations. But I think often it's going in and just giving the dollars with some expectation of what is going to sit down and have a conversation with how those dollars are going to be deployed, and also letting the grantee know that you're with them, you're walking in the shoes with them, and failure at times is a good thing, because as we were saying earlier, you learn from failure, you learn from mistakes, and it helps create a better path forward if done well.
Yeah.
I think that a certain amount of humbleness or humility is really, really important. And to really thank the people who are doing this, choosing this profession. It was funny, last night I wanted to hear Shai Held give a talk. He was giving a talk for Hadar, and I read his bio on Wikipedia, and David Ellenson said he could have had a job at, Harvard or Princeton, or, teaching there, but chose to do Hadar instead. And I thought, right, like this is what he's chosen to do. And there's so many people making choices that I want to thank them for taking on this work, right? And so I think that as donors, like thanking people is really important. I think asking them what they're worrying about is really important. Like it's another way, I think, Alisa, of getting at like what's beyond on failure. Like what are you worried about? Like what are the concerns in your organization? And I think that not asking for too much. I feel like too much paper or too much, like, I sort of feel like if you trust the person in the organization, they're probably doing a good job. And, like there are big foundations that are, asking for lots of work, which may be a good thing at times, but I think individual donors don't need to recreate that wheel, right? Like, it's a little bit like, some of these organizations, I am confident they're doing the work. It's not my job to ask for yet more work, more forms to fill out and more of this and that. At least that's how I feel about it. I think that it shows respect for what they're doing, and I think that's important. It allows them to do the work. It's funny, not in Jewish world, in the NF world, neurofibromatosis, which my daughter has. Like I work with a funded foundation, and we don't have to raise any money, right? We've raised 10 years. We've raised 10 years of money. We don't have to, in the next 10 years, we don't have to raise money. And it just allows the work to take place. And I was thinking about what a difference that is when you're not concerned about having to go ask people for money again and again, but you're actually able to just say, we're going to focus on work. We're going to have, what's the failure rate there? As opposed to when we have to have we have to prove success. How much more risk are we able to take? And I think that notion of catalytic philanthropy, like how is your dollar different, impacts that. And people should be clear about why they're giving, because I think it helps also the professional know what's the relationship about. So those are the pieces that I think help in that relationship.
I think there's another piece. I mean, there's the catalytic philanthropy, taking the risks, but there's also, I think a lot of there's an issue that I think is more discussed now also about operating support,
right,
versus targeted programmatic support.
Right.
And particularly for small organizations, but also for big ones, you must have the infrastructure, you must have the capacity to deliver the programs, and that is critical. And I think it's something that needs to be spoken about more, and it doesn't have to do with women versus men, or it's just outside that realm, but just in the realm of understanding that organizations need a certain amount of dollars to do the work, period. And not demanding that every, that when you are giving a grant, that it's to have this particular program done, or that if you're having you're particularly interested in this program, that you need to pay some amount of money to enable the organization to do the work. So that some percentage of overhead, which people hate, or donors seem to hate, is necessary. It's just necessary.
You are
Right, you
so
wouldn't-
right.
Yeah. Go ahead, Paula.
You are so right about that. The lights have to be kept on. And operating grants are just a perfect way to ensure that the lights are going to be kept on and the real work can get done. And Sally, to your point of the more paperwork and having to reapply, re-up for grants, one of the things that we did this year at the Weinberg Foundation was proactively look through our grants coming up for re-upping, and just said, you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to reapply this year. We proactively renewed grants, and it just, especially in the time of COVID, especially these days, to take that burden off the grantee, the pressures that they are already under. It was just a wonderful thing to be able to do. And the feedback that we're getting is just, thank you. And they could go out and continue to do the hard work.
Right. Like I sometimes wonder what's the reason for, I mean, sometimes there's reasons to the foundation or whatever is operating well, but like, or do they think it's going to help the organization learn more? Like, I think it's just very good to be clear about why the questions are being asked, right?
Mhm.
Like, I think and be clear about even why the questions are being asked or why the reports needs to be done, right? Like, I guess that would be helpful.
Okay, so I'm reading the minds of our audience members because that's what I do. And I know that a question that's on people's minds is, okay, great. So we had a number of institutions and foundations that renewed the operating support during COVID. And I know that there's dozens of people on this call who are saying, okay, but I wasn't getting funded before COVID, then there's been COVID. And now I'm not going to be funded during COVID because we're only funding the organizations that are either supporting frontline, which super important, everybody knows that's important, or who you've already supporting. So already there was a discrepancy between whether I could get in front of you or not. And now there's another discrepancy of, I can't get in front of you now because of COVID. Am I ever going to? And how am I ever going to? How do you guys find new people, new organizations to support? What's your process? Because I think demystifying that could be super helpful.
Well, we at the Weinberg Foundation, on our website, there is a portal through which any organization interested in funding, and we clearly outline what we do and don't fund, but there is an open portal that can tell you quickly whether or not the organization is one that we do fund, can fund, and we'll give you feedback as to whether or not you can move to the next requesting a grant.
Nice.
So we also are actively, our program managers are actively out. We try in looking for potential grantees in our community we support.
You know, I can speak about the Jewish Community Response and Impact Fund that was created during COVID.
Yep.
By a series of foundations who came together. And I think one of the, you know, obviously some of the monies were for response, and I mean, for crisis management, you know, to camps to make sure that the infrastructure is still there when camp can reopen, or JCCs to reach out and fund so that JCCs are there when they can reopen. But some of it was opportunistic funding with for organizations who had not been funded in the past by this set of funders. So it was really, what's going on out there in the world? What can we do to address it? Particularly experiments that were kind of COVID related. So things that were online that people were trying that they hadn't needed to do before. But I think that there was and has been an interest in the experimentation and organizations not necessarily in the fold, if you will, to work with and see what would come of it in this moment of needing to try new things. So there's been some of that. I can't really speak for individual donors and how they've been, people have been looking at things. I think it's probably harder.
All right, so here I come. I want to push back on this just for a minute. And Sally, you go ahead, and then I'll
both individual donors and to the organizations, because to individual donors, it's funny, I recently saw something about some organization embodying peace, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I actually thought, oh, that's probably the daughter of somebody who did Encounter, right? I chair Encounter, they had the same last name. And I wrote to the mom and said, is this your daughter? And it was, and like, lo and behold, I'm now meeting this organization with kids in there. Oh my God, they are like, 25 and under. But you know what? My guess is they'll become like an organization that people will know 20 years now. Certainly those kids will be. And I feel like, oh, I want to get involved and invested in them. So as like an individual donor, I think it's like, where do you see things that look interesting to you and not be like, I don't want to reach out to them, but how do you reach out to them and like have a conversation? It could have gone the other way, but I do think I do think individual donors should take it upon themselves. So for the individual donors on this call, I say that. And then I think to the organizations, I was thinking a little bit about, I was actually at my mother's yesterday and she once gave money. She's involved in Friendship Circle, which is a Chabad organization. We joke, every Chabad rabbi from like Maryland to Boston is now like bringing her shmura matzah, right? Like, I think that I feel like there's a little bit of like not being ashamed, right? Like they really, I am, in a good way, I would say that they are saying like, our cause is really important and we want you to support it, right? And I think that, I know people try, but it's a little bit, like I said, to do one more ask for board members or to push people. People are very, I think there's different types, but people are afraid, a little bit afraid. I don't want to disturb the peace, right? And there's a little bit of like, I think that extra step. And I do see that people who are not afraid, sometimes actually their organizations do find that next donor and like that next person to engage. So I guess I would encourage people to like, and make your board do it too. If we're talking about the boards, make your board do it too, or make other people do it too. Like I know that I just, an op-ed project, it was like a young woman I know who was 30 years old said, another organization is running the op-ed project. Would you think about funding it? I knew nothing about it. I'm like, sure. I was able to say, sure. And I think that we have to get more people who are willing to actually say, this is important to me. So
Right.
I want to put the burden on both groups of people, even in post-COVID times, because
I think
it's a match, right? It's like you need to know about the organizations before you can support them, and the organizations need to know about you before they can ask you. And that is something to kind of push through.
Right. I think that does happen. There are sort of natural channels for that to occur. People look at lists of, who's given to what, and if it's a related thing, they'll find you, or a friend of yours says, I just found out about this organization and I know you're interested in X, so would you want to talk to them? Or
so few people are willing to do that, Alisa. That's what I'm saying. I'm afraid sometimes, you're my friend, and sometimes I think like, should I call Alisa and tell her? Right? And I often make the choice no, right?
Right.
So I think that that's the complication. Like, what would get everybody to do it 10% more?
Right. I think it's also broadening, like widening the circle. So, organizations like yours that provide some knowledge about fields of areas that people can be involved in, organizations that they might want to know about. There's also, the different industry, newsletters and so forth that do bring out some information from time to time about organizations. And so, if you're interested in a particular field, you can, go deep. You can go down a rabbit hole to find out what's around.
And that's one of the reasons that we chose to do what we're doing, right? Is because then we can say, look at this list of 300 social entrepreneurs and leaders. We can show you who's doing this great work in the world. Come on. And, if you're interested in X, you can find that here. So I just wanted to step back a second because I know that there was a call last week with some women's organizations around the JCRIF grant. And I'm not even going to try to say what that stands for, but I know one of my trustee colleagues is going to put that in the chat any second. So this is a big grant, just for everyone who doesn't know. It's $10 million grants, up to $10 million grants over 5 years. There could be a gazillion of them. It's not just one, it could be many. And it's like 4 or 5 foundations, 5 or 6 foundations that have gotten together, just like they did earlier in the pandemic, to this time they want to fund, thank you, the Jewish Community Response and Impact Fund. And they want to fund the big ideas. And what we heard from organizations that joined the call was, I feel like I'm too small. I feel like I'm not going to be seen. I feel like those funders aren't interested in what I'm doing, so I have to make what I'm doing be what they're interested in. And I think the JCRIF fund on paper is awesome. I think it's great that foundations are merging together and trying to do something big, and that each of those foundations will be looking at all of those applications and saying, oh, this may not get the big grant, but this is an interesting organization to support. That's my fantasy. I don't know that that actually happens. It feels to me in some ways like it is a it's designed as something really proactive and really different and really revolutionary. And yet, when we actually saw where the majority of the money went from the first round, it was not as revolutionary as we would have liked. And while it was in some ways, there was also kind of a, I'm going to say this out loud, you guys. So it's recorded. So there was a sense that of the 7 to 10, for example, organizations that were run by Jews of color, that they didn't even get a seat at the table. What happened was, and I could be totally off the chart, but what's the sense is what happened was that the Jews of Color Field Building Initiative received support to support those organizations. And it felt a little bit over on my side over here, like, oh, great. So those organizations aren't the ones sitting at the table. It's the one, and Alana Kaufman and her team are doing an amazing job. And yet, where is then the knowledge base growing for some of those people who are sitting at the table and they're not even seeing it? On the one hand. On the other hand, okay, JCRIF, give me $10 million and I'll give half of it away to organizations that are small, that are run by women, right? Like, when do I play the game? Not me personally, but when does one have to play the game in order to get in? And when does, right. Okay, thank you for correcting me, Alana. They weren't at the table either. There were no Jews of color leaders at the table, but then they did give funds to an organization that wasn't at the table because they're not one of the funders, to then give the money away. And it just feels like it feels like there's a real divide between who has access and who doesn't have access, and how many times we have to hear over and over and over again, no, we want to support gender equity. We want to support racial justice. We want to do social innovation. And yet we see who's at the table. So I'm putting that out there.
Let me
Yes.
respond
Great.
to that a little bit.
Okay.
There's, I'd say that JCRIF came together because a number of funders came together. It wasn't intended to be everything to everyone. It couldn't be everything to everyone. And the people who are around the table were the people who are around the table who had the funds. So, it wasn't, as far as I know, it wasn't intended to be exclusive. I'm not even sitting at the table personally. So I don't really have all the information about how it came together, but I know that there were people who were interested who came together, and there were others who heard about it who said, hey, I would love to ride on this because you know what you're doing and I don't, and so I think in the first instance it was intended to be rescue, so that the Jewish community entities that these funders felt were important should exist. And, as to the, working through, say, the Jews of Color Field Building Initiative, as opposed to directly with organizations in that field. That was the case with other intermediary organizations as well. It was, given the numbers of entities out there who were and still are looking for funds, it would have been an administrative nightmare to deal with every camp individually, to deal with every day school individually, to deal with every JCC individually. So the decision was made to work through the intermediaries because they know their field. So it was an acknowledgement of, how to facilitate the flow of dollars in an efficient way.
Yes.
But
go ahead.
But if we could zoom out a little bit from this particular issue, I think, Jamie, you raise a bigger issue, and that is who has access, who knows what's going on, and how do we raise up, how do we help those smaller organizations be seen, be heard, be known, and so that there is a real sense, and it is a reality that it's not just, okay, we're gonna grant dollars to the JOCI and leave it to Alana to decide. Who are those folks that Alana is dealing with, and why shouldn't they too be known? So as we zoom out and ask that larger question, I think it is really, really important. And why aren't we taking the time to get to know who those organizations are? And whether that's in Jews of color, whether that is in the LGBTQ community, whatever it is, it's upon us to dig deeper. And I think that's part of what this conversation is about.
Right. And I actually have one other take on this. I mean, I'm looking at what it says because I only knew JCRIF from a few months ago when I heard of it. The big idea with $10 million grants are they looking for the big idea? Is a big idea that you're giving $10 million? It's like a ridiculous, in my mind, it's a ridiculous setup. It's like, there's not a big idea that's going to save the Jewish community. We should just give up on it, right? Like there are many ideas that are going to need long-term funding, that are going to do incremental change and hopefully make the Jewish community a community that people want to be a part of, and a just and moral, and a community that does good in the world, and the individuals find spiritual fulfillment and do good. So like, there's not a great idea, like, right? There's not a big idea. And the same for funding. People should give $10 million is, it's a lot of money and it's a little money. It's not going to save the Jewish world, right? So I think that setting this up is almost an impossibility. It's like, you wonder why people want to drop out when they're 60 years old, right? Well, we were promised something that's not really achievable, right? It's like, this is like it's a long-term game. And I think this idea that we're going to have quick wins with big ideas it just sets people up to want to, I think, step away, or like, my idea is not big enough. You know what? Your idea probably is big enough, but it's just going to do, it's going to do the kind of change in the world that's realistic on whatever the budget of your organization is. Or, you're not going to, I have that same thing. I'm not going to be able to change the world on my, philanthropic dollars. Like, I'm not able to do that. So right. I actually even think the whole premise of some of this is like, it's hard. I think it's hard. I think we have to fight against it ourselves. And I think that, like, this is the Jewish Women's Foundation. Like, I think women in some ways can have, like, we don't have to play the game that we're going to like take over the world, right? Like, we have to actually sort of say, this is the way we're going to do the work in part, or at least be aware of it. Like, you bring that consciousness to the question.
Right. Although I do want to take over the world. Just
I want to take over the world, but that's not realistic. Not on $10 million. Right?
Exactly.
Not to save the Jewish community on $10 million.
Right. Right.
And
so
just another word on that. I don't think that's the intention either. It's not to try to save the world on $10 million.
But it says the big idea. It just sets people up.
It does. Yeah, it does. They're looking for something new, which doesn't mean that they're not going to continue to fund other things that are not, the big idea, the new shiny object.
I was coming home the other day and I really thought, I was looking at actually the Covenant Foundation's, like, the newsletter of what they funded. I thought, oh my God, if people don't want to be Jewish, like, we have so many great things in this community that if people have the opportunity to participate, right? There's, like, if you're interested in arts or music or food or, study, and like, in some ways we should just fund the things that we have, right? Like, we should really invest in what we have, because some percentage of people aren't interested. And I think it's a bummer to those of us who care a lot. But, like, in some ways, if we actually did a good job with what we have, we might be even stronger, right? Like, always looking at what we don't have as opposed to what we do have.
But an idea just could be that we take the set of ideas that are in one field and bring them together. Okay. So it's not necessarily inventing new organizations. It's new ways of approaching the world we have. So looking at things anew, it doesn't mean that we have to go invent a new organization. It may just be bringing them together in a different way. I mean, like, just as an example, the Hebrew College just announced that it is going to be on a new campus, but it's with 9 other organizations. So that concept of coming together and joining forces to be something bigger, but there's funding that's required for that. So I'm not saying that that's what JCRIF is going to do, but I'm just saying that there are ideas that aren't like, let's invent something new. It's addressing a problem in a different kind of way.
Right, liberal Jews should whatever, you've heard me say this, right? The liberal rabbinical world should think about that. If there was more money, I think people are all worried about their own little thing. When there's more money, actually, people are more willing to work together, right?
Yeah.
Often, right? That's true.
So,
okay. So I wanted to, I'm going to give Barbara Dobkin, one of our famous feminist funders, a chance to make a comment, and then we're going to have to close because it's already 1 o'clock. I can't believe it. Go ahead, Barbara.
I have a lot to say, as you can imagine, and I'll try not to do it. I do remember when the Jewish community decided it would be a good idea to have these little new projects come, like JW and all of those things. And we started all these things, and then they couldn't raise the money they needed afterwards. That's why big ideas that cost a lot of money are only going to cost us more. However, I do want to say there are little things like the Jewish Women's Archive. I was in a meeting yesterday morning where somebody talked about women in history. And one would have assumed that nobody was looking at the women in history. The Jewish Women's Archive, now I'm coming to this as the former chair of the board, the founding chair, and I still fund it, and I am asking everybody else to, but that's not the point. The point is, it's 25 years later, and it's still $1 million organization because people don't understand that they are doing educational stuff. What's educational about that? I mean, I could go through the whole thing. So let's not forget some of the smaller organizations that are killing themselves to make the same kind of money they need. And I really don't have a lot to say on this. Jamie, you really, Jamie says whatever's on her mind. I used to do it, but I'm much older than she is, so I'm a little more. Anyway, this was really terrific.
Okay, wow. So everyone, first of all, thank you for being here. Our time's up. Thank you, Sally, Paula, and Alisa. I feel like we need an annual weekend summit to chip away at some of the systemic challenges that we're facing. I'm really appreciative of your time and your wisdom on topics raised today. I want to thank everybody else for being here and for typing your great comments in the chat, which we save and we look at and we parse, which is really important. And as our audience becomes more nationally and internationally focused, this conversation becomes more and more rich. So I thank you for being here. I want you to join us next month on April 29th from 5:30 to 6:30 when we welcome to our annual gala, Yolanda Savage-Narva, who is the Director of Racial Equity and Diversity and Inclusion at the Union for Reform Judaism. She's going to share with us the importance of moral passion. And also Rebecca Traister, who is the author of Good and Mad, who will discuss how women's anger can be used as a catalyst for change. Both of those things seem pretty important to this crowd. We'll also announce the third cohort of the JWFNY Collective of Jewish Entrepreneurs and Leaders. You'll find a link in the chat. And tomorrow you'll also receive a post-conversation email with a recording from today and relevant links. Please share them far and wide. Anybody who wasn't here, wanted to be here, please let them know that they can view this recording, and it's all food for thought. We're not going to solve all of the problems in one 1 hour session or 2 1-hour sessions. But I think if we keep chipping away and keep refocusing and melding and figuring out how this works with that and how that works with this and demystifying some of this grantee-grantor relationship, I think it's going to be better for everybody in the field. So yay us, collectively us, for being leaders in this and being willing to look at this hard topic that not a lot of people are actually willing to talk about. So I thank you for allowing me to push back on you. I thank everybody else here for being here, and please have a wonderful, sweet Passover holiday. No one is liberated until we're all liberated, and that's what we hope for moving forward. So woo, thank you for being here, you guys.